I was barely tall enough to see over the stakes when my grandmother walked me down her tomato rows and pointed at the bare ground beneath every plant. She had one rule: empty soil is wasted soil, and a family that depends on its own land cannot afford to waste anything. What she planted there, from the simplest herbs to the most advanced companions, most growers have never been taught. When I was a child, I learned to watch the ground as closely as the plants. The old folks would shake their heads at a tomato row with nothing but bare earth underneath. It wasn't just untidy, it was a warning. Sun would beat down and bake that open soil until it cracked. And every time the wind picked up or a hard rain fell, you could see the finest topsoil disappear, carried off before the season had hardly begun. The ground dried so fast you'd pour water in the morning and find it gone by noon, leaving the roots thirsty and the earth tired. Grandmother used to say, if you leave the bed naked, you'll feed the weeds before you feed your family. And she was right. Weeds would move in, quick as anything, and then every spare moment went to pulling and hoeing just to keep them from choking the tomatoes. You could feel the difference with your hands. Living soil under cover stayed cool and soft, but bare patches grew hard and thin, losing the life that took years to build. This wasn't something we learned from a book or a county agent. It was the lesson of blisters and lost harvests, handed down one season at a time from a family that couldn't afford to waste a single inch of ground. I always tell folks who are new to gardening, start with the easy companions before you try to plant a whole quilt beneath your tomatoes. When I was little, my mother would send me out with a handful of thyme cuttings and say, tuck these right under the tomato leaves where the sun barely touches the ground. Thyme never seemed to mind a bit of neglect. It crept along the soil, held in the cool, and asked for almost nothing. No extra water, no rich feeding. It just kept the ground soft and shaded, crowding out weeds before they got a foothold. Sage was another steady friend. We would plant it in the same sheltered ring, and as long as you did not drown it or let the chickens scratch it up, it would last all season. Oregano found its place there too, spreading gently without smothering the tomatoes or stealing their food. And basil, well, basil was always the hopeful one. My grandmother said a row without basil was like bread without butter. It thrived on little, gave back its scent to the whole patch, and never seemed to quarrel with its neighbors. These herbs made the simplest start, low, hardy, and forgiving, perfect for anyone learning the old ways, or for those who want to see what a living, working garden bed can become with just a little extra care. Lettuce was always the test of a careful gardener in my family. My aunt would slip a row of it right at the feet of the tomatoes, trusting their leaves to filter the harshest sun. In the open, lettuce would bolt in a flash, turning bitter and tough before we'd had a chance to pick more than a handful. But tucked in the dappled shade, the head stayed cool and sweet, stretching the harvest by weeks. The same went for early radishes. My uncle used to say a radish grown in gentle ground comes up plump and mild, not hot and hollowed by the afternoon heat. If you watched closely, you'd see how the tomato row made its own little shelter, a pocket of cooler air and softer soil. We had a simple rule. If a plant looked tired or wilted in full sun, we'd give it the free shelter the tomatoes already offered. No need for fancy shade cloth or sprinklers, just the quiet teamwork of plants looking after each other. That's the kind of wisdom you remember every spring. When the old stories come back to life in the garden rows, there's a deeper lesson the old folks taught, one you don't hear much from seed catalogs or garden clubs. Once you've learned to read the ground, you can begin to work with the soil's memory, not just its surface, but what's hidden beneath. My grandmother would kneel in the dirt and run her fingers through the earth, feeling for that quiet richness left behind by last year's beans or the fading straw of an old mulch. That's when she'd say it was time for the roots, the careful crops, carrots, beets, parsnips, rutabaga. These are not for the hurried or the heavy-handed. They ask for a bed that's been gently used, not loaded with fresh manure or too much chicken litter. Tomatoes are greedy for nitrogen, pulling it up to build thick stems and heavy leaves. If you crowd the soil with too much richness, the roots of carrots or beets will answer with a show of tall, feathery tops and little to harvest below. Grandmother called it a gardener's disappointment, green glory above, nothing but thin, twisted roots beneath. She'd remind me, feed the tomatoes early, then let the roots follow after. When you get it right, the wispy leaves of carrots and the open crowns of beets let air move beneath the tomato canopy, keeping the soil cool and the air dry. That thin foliage doesn't trap the damp the way lettuce or spinach might. On muggy mornings, you'll see how the breeze slips through, helping to keep mildew and blight at bay. It's a quiet partnership. Roots working below, tomatoes reaching above, each giving the other just enough room to thrive. That's the kind of balance you only find when you listen to the ground and remember the lessons handed down from those who worked it before you. Beans always had their place at the far edge of our tomato beds, right where the sun hit hardest. My grandfather would say, "Don't let a planting row be selfish. Every plant ought to give something back." That's why we saved the sunniest strip for beans. They climbed their poles or the edge of a fence, catching every bit of light that spilled past the tomatoes, never crowding the fruit or shading out the herbs beneath. But the real gift came underground. Where beans grew, the soil felt richer the next year, looser, darker, more alive. Grandmother called beans the quiet helpers, because while they grew, they pulled something out of the air and tucked it into the earth. Nitrogen, the very food tomatoes crave but can't make for themselves. In a family that counted every penny, this meant we could skip the store-bought fertilizer, trusting the beans to keep the soil strong. It's a quiet kind of balance, the old Amish way, never letting a patch of ground go to waste and never letting a plant take without giving. That's how you keep a garden working for you season after season without spending more than you need. Not every plant belongs at the foot of a tomato. My father used to warn me about crowding spinach too close, and I learned the lesson the hard way. Spinach is hungry, draws up the same nitrogen the tomatoes need, and if you pack them together, you'll find both looking pale and stunted before the season's half done. There's no magic in the soil that lets every green thrive side by side. Some plants just fight each other for supper, and nobody wins. Broccoli is another mistake I've seen repeated, even by careful hands. Its heavy leaves cast a deep shade, blocking the light from reaching the lower tomato branches. The stems grow thick and push out, stealing air and space until the tomatoes can't breathe. You end up with a tangle, neither crop reaching its promise, both struggling for water and room. These aren't rules from a book or some expert's chart. They're warnings earned by families who watched a season's work slip away to overambition. The best gardens show restraint as much as abundance. Choose companions with care and know when to leave space for each to thrive. Flowers belong to the advanced stage of the border once the basic companions are mastered. Marigolds form a living barrier around tomato beds, holding back aphids, hornworms, and soil-borne pests without a drop of chemical spray. In the shaded corners, violets settle quietly, asking little and filling gaps with roots that hold the soil and petals once used for cough syrup or poultice. Along the sunniest edge, lavender thrives, its scent drifting across the row. Dried and hung in kitchens, lavender kept moths from the pantry and soothed restless sleep. These flowers were never just for beauty. They worked as protectors, part of a tradition many modern gardeners have let slip from memory. Onions are the quietest of companions in the tomato bed, but they earn their place every year. My father would plant a single line of onion sets along the edge, never fussing over them, just tucking them in where the ground was still open. Their leaves rise straight and slender, never shading out the tomatoes or tangling with the herbs. Underground, Onions keep to themselves, drawing little from the soil, never asking for more than their share. You hardly notice them growing, but come midsummer, they stand neat and upright, filling gaps that might otherwise go to waste. There's a thrift to onions, a lesson in using every bit of space without crowding or complaint. In a garden where nothing is wasted, that quiet fit is worth more than any showy harvest. The old folks would say, let every plant do its work, but let the onion remind you how to do it without taking up more room than you truly need. One season stands out in my memory, though I wish it didn't. We were short on time that spring and left a stretch of ground at the end of the tomato row untouched. No thyme, no lettuce, not even a handful of onions. It seemed harmless enough, just a bit of open earth waiting for a better day. By midsummer, that bare patch told its own story. The soil baked hard, weeds crept in, and every rain seemed to wash away more of what we'd built. I remember my father standing there silent, his boot pressing into the cracked dirt. He didn't scold, just let us see for ourselves what happens when land is left idle. That lesson stayed with me longer than any harvest. A tomato row isn't finished until every bit of ground is put to work, feeding, sheltering, or guarding something worth growing. My grandfather used to say, patience is a harvest all its own. Today, when the world rushes for quick fixes, this old way still returns more than tomatoes, it returns self-reliance. The soil remembers every careful hand. If we honor that, our gardens and families both grow stronger. Share your stories below.